They told her, "Go back to Africa." The quiet black CEO let the flight test itself. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The airport terminal looked like every modern promise of order and efficiency: glass walls, polished floors, sunlight stretching across steel beams like nothing ugly could happen here. But it did. Right there, in the open space between the boarding gate and the glass windows, she stood out. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, clean lines, understated power. No logos, no excess. Her hair was pulled back neatly, posture straight, eyes calm and observant. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was going. That was what seemed to offend him. The man stormed into her space with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Beige suit, red face, anger carried like entitlement. Before anyone could step in, his hand shot forward and gripped the lapel of her blazer, fingers curling into the fabric as if he owned the moment. His voice exploded across the terminal. "Go back to Africa." The words didn't echo. They landed. Conversations around them collapsed into silence. A woman near the gate froze mid-sentence. A couple turned sharply, eyes wide. Somewhere behind them, someone laughed too loud, too fast, already lifting a phone to record. A spectacle was forming, and Naomi Carter did not flinch. She didn't pull away, didn't raise her voice, didn't ask for help. She simply turned her eyes toward the man holding her jacket and looked at him calm, steady, unafraid. That alone unsettled him. "You don't belong here," he continued, squeezing tighter, performing for the small audience now gathering. "This is a private flight, real passengers only." Behind Naomi, a uniformed pilot stood frozen, watching. His expression was unreadable. He hadn't stepped in yet. Not out of agreement, but hesitation. The kind that comes when protocol hasn't told you what to do. Security was nearby. They saw it. Everyone did. And yet, the first voice that broke the silence didn't address the man. It addressed her. "Ma'am," a staff member said carefully, approaching Naomi. Tone practiced and controlled. "I'm going to need you to stay calm." Stay calm. As if calm wasn't exactly what she was. Naomi slowly shifted her gaze from the man gripping her jacket to the staff member speaking to her. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and even. "I am calm," she said, "but you might want to address what just happened." The staff member hesitated, looked at the man, looked at the growing crowd, looked back at Naomi, then stepped back. The man scoffed, satisfied. Someone behind him laughed again, phone still raised, capturing every second like entertainment. Naomi released a slow breath and turned her eyes toward the glass wall overlooking the runway. Outside, planes moved with perfect coordination. Inside, the system hesitated. She had seen this before. Different airport, different face. Same assumptions. She slipped one hand into her jacket pocket, brushing against her phone, but didn't take it out. Not yet. This wasn't the moment to interrupt. This was the moment to observe. Because when people think you have no power, they show you exactly who they are. And the flight hadn't even begun yet. Naomi Carter didn't step away when the staff member retreated. She didn't chase the apology that never came. She stayed exactly where she was. Still, composed, unmoved. That, more than anything, confused the people watching. Most confrontations fed on reaction-raised voices, trembling hands, visible fear. Naomi offered none of it. Her calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you don't need permission to exist in a space. She adjusted the cuff of her navy blazer, smoothing the fabric where it had been clenched moments earlier. Not to erase what happened, but to remind herself that she was still in control. A few feet away, the man who had grabbed her now leaned back, chest puffed, emboldened by the silence around him. He had expected resistance, tears maybe, anger at least. Instead, he got indifference, and it unsettled him more than shouting ever could. "See?" he muttered to no one in particular. Always playing victim. Naomi didn't turn. She was listening not to him, but to the room. The whispers had started. Low, fragmented. Did he really say that? Why didn't security stop him? Is she okay? Phones hovered at chest level now, not quite recording, not quite put away. People wanted to watch without being seen watching. They always did. Behind her, the pilot shifted his weight. Naomi could feel it without looking. Years of navigating boardrooms and negotiations had taught her how to read presence the way others read words. The man in uniform wasn't indifferent. He was uncertain, torn between instinct and instruction. Naomi understood that feeling intimately. She had built her life in places where she was never expected to lead. First classrooms, then conference rooms, then entire companies where people assumed she was the assistant, the consultant, the diversity hire, anything but the decision maker. At 26, a venture capitalist once told her she was impressive for someone with her background. At 31, a board member asked if she was comfortable managing people with more experience. At 38, a reporter asked who had helped her get so far. Each time, she learned the same lesson. People reveal themselves fastest when they think you have nothing to take from them. This flight was supposed to be routine, a short domestic trip. No entourage, no announcement. She had booked it that way on purpose. Not because she needed anonymity, but because she needed clarity. Naomi had questions. About how authority behaved when it wasn't challenged. About how systems responded when bias arrived uninvited. About who was protected and who was corrected. So far, the answers were coming quickly. Security still hadn't intervened. The man still hadn't been told to step away. And no one had asked Naomi her name. A staff supervisor approached again, this time closer, voice lowered. "Mayam, are you traveling alone?" Naomi turned slightly now, just enough to meet her eyes. "Yes," she replied. The supervisor nodded, lips pressed together. "Do you have identification with you?" There it was. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't bristle. She simply reached into her bag and removed her passport, holding it out calmly. No rush, no apology. The supervisor glanced at it briefly. Too briefly. "That should be fine," she said, handing it back. Then quieter. "Please remain here while we sort this out." Sort what out? The insult had already happened. The harm already landed. What was left to sort was convenience. Naomi watched as the supervisor walked away toward the man this time, but not with urgency, more with negotiation, as if his behavior were a misunderstanding rather than an offense. Naomi looked toward the gate again. The boarding screen flickered, delayed. Good. She slipped her phone from her pocket and typed a single message. No names, no explanations, just 4 words. Observe. Do not intervene. She locked the screen and slipped the phone away. Around her, the terminal hummed back to life, pretending nothing was wrong. Naomi Carter stood quietly at the center of it all, letting the system continue, because tests only work when no one knows they're being tested. The delay stretched longer than it needed to. Naomi noticed that first. The boarding screen blinked from on time to pending, then settled into an uneasy pause. No announcement followed, no explanation, just silence thick and procedural. That was how systems bought themselves time. The man who had grabbed her jacket leaned against a column now, arms crossed, confidence returning to his posture. He wasn't worried. People like him rarely were. Not in places like this. Airports, lounges, gates. These spaces were built to reward familiarity, not fairness. He glanced at Naomi and smirked. "Told you," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "They'll sort you out." Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she shifted her attention outward, tracking the choreography unfolding around her. 2 security officers approached not together, but staggered, as if unsure who should take the lead. Their eyes flicked to Naomi first, took her in, the navy suit, the calm expression, the stillness that didn't beg. One of them spoke quietly into his radio. The other asked, "Is there a problem here?" The man answered immediately, "Yeah, she doesn't belong on this flight." No one asked why. No one asked what happened. The question hung in the air like it had already been answered. Naomi stepped forward just enough to be included without inserting herself. "There was an incident," she said evenly. He grabbed my jacket and told me to go back to Africa. The words landed flat. Factual. Undramatic. The officers exchanged a glance. Sir, one of them said, turning to the man, did you touch her? The man scoffed. I barely brushed her. She was causing a scene. Naomi almost smiled, causing a scene while standing still. The officer nodded slowly as if weighing inconvenience rather than truth. Mom, he said, eyes returning to Naomi. We're just going to need you to step aside while we clear this up. Step aside. Again. Naomi looked past him, toward the gate, where a small crowd had gathered under the pretense of waiting. Some were openly watching now. Others pretended to scroll. A few still held phones at awkward angles, deciding whether this was worth capturing. She took one step, not back, not forward, just to the side. Enough to comply. Enough to be seen as reasonable. The system rewarded that instantly. The man relaxed. See? That's how it works, he said to no one in particular. You follow the rules. It is wage-owed. Rules, Naomi thought, were only ever enforced downward. A supervisor arrived next clipboard, earpiece, practiced smile. She listened briefly to the officers, nodded, then turned to Naomi with a tone that suggested resolution. Ma'am, we're going to need to verify your boarding credentials, she said. Just a routine check. Routine. Naomi handed over her boarding pass without comment. The supervisor studied it longer than necessary. Too long for someone confident in their authority. Her brow furrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in confusion. This is business class, she said slowly. Yes, Naomi replied. The supervisor looked up, looked back at the screen, then glanced toward the man, who met her eyes with an expectant smile. Well, the supervisor said carefully, there seems to be some confusion. Let me just confirm a few things. She walked away again. Naomi watched the retreating figure and felt the shape of the pattern solidify. The insult had been treated as secondary, the reaction as the primary issue, and her presence as the variable needing adjustment. Behind her, the pilot took a step forward at last. Is everything all right? He asked, voice controlled, neutral. Naomi turned slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time. I believe you're watching the same thing I am. He hesitated, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. Around them, murmurs grew louder. Someone finally spoke up. That guy was way out of line, a woman said from the crowd. The man snapped back instantly. Mind your business. No one corrected him. The supervisor returned, her expression tighter now. Mom, she said, lowering her voice. We're still confirming your details. Please remain here. Naomi folded her hands calmly in front of her. Of course. Inside, she marked the moment. This was no longer about one man's words. This was about how many opportunities the system had been given to correct itself, and how deliberately it had chosen not to. She glanced at the boarding screen again. Still delayed. Still waiting. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, letting the response finish writing itself. The longer Naomi stood there, the more the room began to change. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But subtly, like pressure building behind glass. A man a few steps behind the aggressor lowered his phone from eye level to his chest. He had been smiling at first, entertained by the chaos, by the confidence of the man who thought he was untouchable. But now his smile faltered. The moment wasn't funny anymore. It was uncomfortable. And discomfort made people rethink their silence. A woman near the gate whispered to her partner, "Did you see him grab her jacket?" "I did," the partner replied quietly. Security should have stopped that already. Their voices were low, but Naomi heard them. She heard everything now. When you stop defending yourself, you start noticing who else is waking up. The pilot stepped closer, not enough to take control, but enough to be seen. His uniform carried weight, authority. And people noticed when authority paused instead of acting. One of the security officers shifted his stance, suddenly aware of the audience. He glanced around, catching the eyes of several passengers watching openly now. Judgment flickered across their faces, not toward Naomi, but toward the system surrounding her. The man who had caused it all sensed the shift. His posture stiffened. "What?" he snapped at no one in particular. "You all gonna stare now?" Someone finally answered. "That wasn't okay." a young woman said from the side, voice steady but tight. She didn't step forward. She didn't raise her phone. She just spoke. You don't get to talk to people like that. The man laughed sharply. Mind your business. This is my business, she replied. I'm standing right here. For the first time since it began, the narrative cracked. Naomi didn't turn to her, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her out loud. But something in Naomi's stillness shifted an almost imperceptible softening of her shoulders. Not relief, recognition. Witnesses mattered. The supervisor returned again, her smile gone now, replaced by calculation. We're still verifying some details, she said, voice clipped. Please be patient. Patient? Another voice cut in. Older, male, calm. She's been patient this whole time. Heads turned. The speaker was a man in a worn leather jacket, standing with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the scene. That guy grabbed her, said something racist, and you're acting like she's the problem. The supervisor stiffened. Sir, please. No, he said. You don't get to please your way out of this. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not applause, not outrage, something quieter, agreement. The security officers exchanged another glance. One of them cleared his throat. Sir, he said to the aggressor this time, I need you to step back. The man bristled. Are you serious? Step back, the officer repeated. It wasn't justice, but it was movement. The man took a half step away from Naomi, anger flashing across his face. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I'm the one being harassed now. Naomi watched him carefully, the way his confidence wavered, the way he searched for support that no longer came automatically. Behind her, the pilot finally spoke with more weight. We're not boarding until this is resolved, he said, loud enough for the gate to hear. The boarding screen flickered again. Delayed. A few passengers exhaled. Some groaned, but no one left. Naomi sensed it, the collective realization settling in. This wasn't an inconvenience anymore. This was a moment. And moments, once recognized, demand sides. A young airport employee near the desk leaned toward a colleague and whispered, I saw her boarding pass earlier. It's legit. The colleague hesitated. Are you sure? I'm sure. Naomi didn't look back, but her jaw tightened slightly. The system was beginning to speak not through authority, but through witnesses who could no longer pretend they hadn't seen what they saw. Phones rose again, not for entertainment this time, for evidence. The man noticed and snapped, Don't record me. No, someone replied calmly. We're recording this. Naomi remained silent at the center of it all. Navy suit unwrinkled, gaze steady. She had not asked anyone to defend her. She hadn't demanded intervention. She had simply stayed. And that, it turned out, was enough to wake the room. The terminal noise softened not because people stopped talking, but because Naomi stopped hearing it. Her focus drifted inward, pulled by a familiar weight pressing against her chest. Not fear, not anger, memory. She had learned long ago that moments like this never stood alone. They stacked, layered themselves across years, different locations, same tone. Charlotte, 16 years old. She stood in a hotel lobby wearing her best-dressed navy again, ironed by her mother that morning. Sunday shoes, hair neat, hands folded the way she'd been taught. She was waiting for her parents to return from parking the car when a woman behind the desk looked up and frowned. This area is for guests only, the woman said. Naomi explained softly, gave her last name, pointed toward the elevators. The woman didn't listen. Security came anyway. She remembered the heat in her face as she was escorted outside, the glass doors closing behind her with a quiet finality. She remembered how no one in the lobby said a word, how silence felt heavier than accusation. Atlanta, 24. A business class lounge. Her first major contract signed just days before. She walked in confident, earned, only to be stopped by a man with a badge who asked if she was lost. He apologized later, after verification, after embarrassment. And then there were the boardrooms. The smiles that tightened when she spoke too firmly. The raised eyebrows when she didn't soften her voice. The whispered, aggressive labels that followed her out of meetings she had led. Each moment taught her something. Never rush to explain yourself. Never interrupt people while they're revealing who they are. The present snapped back into focus as a sharp voice cut through the air. This is taking too long, the man barked. I've got places to be. Wait. Internable. Of course he did. A security officer stepped toward Naomi again, this time closer than before. Ma'am, he said quietly, for everyone's comfort, we might need you to step away from the gate. There it was. The escalation disguised as concern. Naomi looked at him fully now. Not confrontational, just clear. Why? The officer hesitated. To de-escalate. By removing me? She asked gently. He didn't answer. Behind him, the supervisor shifted, clearly uncomfortable with how many eyes were now watching. Phones were no longer hidden. They were raised openly. The room had decided this mattered. Naomi felt it, that subtle tightening in her spine. The moment when patience stops being passive and becomes deliberate restraint. This was the line. She reached into her bag slowly, intentionally, and pulled out her phone. Not hurried, not dramatic, just enough movement to command attention. The man scoffed. Oh, here we go, he muttered, calling someone to play the victim. Naomi didn't look at him. She unlocked her phone and scrolled once, then stopped. I want to be very clear, she said calmly, voice carrying without being raised. I'm not leaving. I haven't violated any policy, and I'm not the one who needs to be managed right now. The supervisor opened her mouth, closed it again. The pilot stepped forward another pace, now fully present. His voice was lower, firmer. Let's slow this down, he said. No one's going anywhere until we sort facts from assumptions. That word assumptions hung in the air like an accusation no one wanted to own. Naomi met his eyes briefly. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. He was starting to understand. The man rolled his eyes. This is unbelievable. You people always make everything about race. Naomi turned to him then. Finally. Her expression wasn't angry. It was tired. Tired in the way someone gets when they recognize a pattern they've outgrown. You made it about race the moment you told me where I belong, she said. A hush fell over the gate. Naomi looked around at the witnesses, the staff, the security officers caught between habit and accountability. She thought of every moment she had swallowed words to keep rooms comfortable. Not today. Her thumb hovered over her screen. One call away, one confirmation away. But she waited. Because the most powerful thing she had learned, more powerful than titles, contracts, or authority, was timing, and the system was seconds away from crossing a line it wouldn't be able to step back from. Naomi Carter didn't make the call right away. That was the part no one understood. In moments like this, people expected escalation, raised voices, demands, the sharp theater of authority. They expected her to prove something, to justify her presence, to reach for power as if it were a weapon. Instead, Naomi stood exactly where she was and let the room breathe. The supervisor shifted her weight again, glancing between the security officers, the pilot, and the growing crowd. This was no longer procedural, it was political, and she knew it. We're still trying to confirm, the supervisor began. Naomi lifted one finger, not in warning, in pause. Take your time, she said calmly. I'm in no rush. The 7-dime, that sentence landed harder than any threat, because it reversed the pressure. The man laughed nervously. You hear that? He said to no one in particular. She thinks she's in charge now. Naomi didn't respond. She lowered her gaze to her phone, not to call, not yet, but to read. A message had come in moments earlier. One line, precise, familiar. Standing by, watching the feed, she slipped the phone back into her bag. Across the gate, the pilot took another step forward, now close enough that his presence changed the geometry of the scene. Authority had finally chosen a side, if only tentatively. Security, he said, voice steady. I need a clear account of what happened, from the beginning. Something. The officers hesitated. One looked toward the man, the other looked at Naomi. She was being disruptive, the man interjected quickly. I told her to calm down. Naomi tilted her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the lie. That's not accurate, she said. You grabbed my jacket. You told me to go back to Africa. Multiple people witnessed it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't add emotion. She didn't need to. The pilot's jaw tightened. Did you touch her? He asked the man directly. The man hesitated just a beat too long. Look, it wasn't like that. The pilot turned to the security officers. Was there physical contact? One officer nodded reluctantly. Yes, briefly. Das, briefly. Naomi noticed how language softened harm, how words were chosen to protect the wrong people. She stepped forward half a pace, not aggressively, purposefully. I'd like this documented, she said. All of it. The supervisor stiffened. Ma'am, let's not escalate. I'm not escalating, Naomi replied. I'm recording accuracy. Silence. Phones were fully raised now. No more pretending, no more half measures. This had crossed the invisible threshold where people stopped worrying about inconvenience and started worrying about integrity. The man looked around, suddenly aware he was no longer the loudest voice in the space. This is insane, he muttered. You're all overreacting. Naomi met his eyes one last time. You mistook silence for permission, she said. That's a common error. After, she reached into her bag again and this time removed her phone fully. The screen lit her face softly, calm, unrushed. She dialed one number. It rang once, twice. Then, yes, Naomi, a voice answered. Female, crisp, professional, not surprised. Naomi didn't turn away from the scene as she spoke. I need you to continue observing. No intervention yet. A pause. Understood. We're seeing everything. Naomi ended the call. The pilot frowned slightly. Is there someone else involved? He asked. Yes, Naomi replied. But they're not the ones who matter right now. Whether with. She looked around the gate at the witnesses, the staff, the security officers standing at the edge of a decision that would define more than this flight. What matters, she continued, is how you choose to respond when you think no one important is watching. The boarding screen flickered again. Delayed, pending review. A murmur spread through the crowd. This was no longer about departure times. This was about accountability, unfolding in real time. Naomi slipped her phone back into her bag and folded her hands calmly in front of her. She had made her move. Not loud, not final. Just enough to let the system know it was no longer being observed by chance. It was being observed by design. The shift didn't come with an announcement. It came with a name. The pilot's radio crackled softly at his shoulder. He turned away just long enough to listen, his posture changing almost immediately. The hesitation drained from his stance, replaced by something sharper alertness edged with disbelief. He looked back at Naomi. Really looked at her this time. Miss Carter, he said carefully. The sound of her name sliced through the terminal louder than any shout. Naomi lifted her eyes to him, calm as ever. Yes. A ripple moved through the crowd. The supervisor froze mid-step. One of the security officers straightened instinctively. Even the man still standing too close, still simmering, felt it. The way rooms always feel when gravity shifts. The pilot cleared his throat. I need to confirm something, he said, voice controlled but strained. Are you Naomi Carter of Skyward Holdings? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She let the silence do what it did best. Then simply, I am. The world seemed to pause. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, wait, that Naomi Carter? Phones tilted higher. The supervisor's face drained of color. Skyward, as in the majority shareholder, Naomi finished evenly. And chair of the oversight board. The man laughed once. Too sharp. Too loud. That's not funny, he snapped. You expect us to believe that? Naomi turned to him slowly. This time, there was no tiredness in her eyes. No restraint. Just clarity. You told me to go back to Africa, she said. On an aircraft you don't own. Operated by a company you don't control. Overseen by a board I sit on. The words landed like a verdict. The pilot took a step back, stunned. Ma'am, he said, now fully formal. I had no idea. That, Naomi replied quietly, is exactly the problem. The supervisor swallowed hard. Miss Carter, if we had known. Naomi raised her hand gently. No, don't finish that sentence. The terminal held its breath. If you had known, Naomi continued, this never would have happened. And that's why it matters that you didn't. I. The man stumbled backward half a step. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You set this up. No, Naomi said. I showed up. A hush fell over the gate so complete that the distant hum of the runway became audible again. The pilot straightened, professional instinct kicking in. We're suspending boarding immediately, he announced. This incident is now under formal review. A murmur rolled through the crowd, not frustration, but awe. One of the security officers turned toward the man. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the gate. The man's voice cracked. You can't be serious. I am, the officer replied. Very. Naomi watched it all without satisfaction, without anger. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. The supervisor approached Naomi cautiously now, her earlier confidence gone. Miss Carter, she said softly, how would you like to proceed? Naomi met her gaze. I'd like the truth documented, she said. I'd like every witness statement preserved. And I'd like this handled exactly the way it would have been if I were no one you recognized. The supervisor nodded quickly. Of course. Naomi glanced at the pilot. And I'd like you to remember something, she added. This didn't become serious when you learned my name. It became serious when he put his hands on me, and when no one stopped him. The pilot lowered his head slightly. Not in submission, in understanding. Around them, passengers whispered, stunned by the realization settling in. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She let them show everything. Naomi Carter adjusted her navy blazer one final time and stood tall at the center of the gate. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just present. The reveal was complete, and the system, fully exposed, had nowhere left to hide. The system didn't fall apart all at once. It unraveled. Quietly, publicly, irreversibly. The security officer gestured firmly toward the man. Sir, this way. No, the man snapped, panic finally bleeding through his bravado. This is a misunderstanding. She tricked everyone. No one responded. Not the crowd. Not the staff. Not the phone still recording. He was no longer the center of the story. He was the evidence. As he was escorted away from the gate, his voice grew louder, desperate. This is harassment. I didn't do anything wrong. Is. The words echoed weakly against glass and steel, stripped of authority the moment no one backed them. Naomi didn't watch him leave. She was watching the people who stayed. The supervisor moved quickly now, speaking into her earpiece with clipped urgency. We need incident control. Yes. Physical contact confirmed. Racial language confirmed. Board-level involvement. The phrase board level rippled outward like a shockwave. Staff who had hovered at a distance suddenly straightened. Roles clarified. Lines redrawn. The casual negligence that had protected the moment minutes ago evaporated under scrutiny. The pilot addressed the gate again, voice steady but changed. Ladies and gentlemen, boarding is suspended. We appreciate your patience. No groans this time, no complaints. People understood. A second security officer approached Naomi, posture respectful now. Miss Carter, we'll need a formal statement when you're ready. Naomi nodded once. I'll provide it. Desechoed. The supervisor hesitated, then spoke quietly. I want to apologize for how this was handled. Naomi met her eyes, not cold, not forgiving. Honest. Save apologies for after accountability, she said. They mean more then. The supervisor swallowed and nodded. Understood. Behind them, a young employee stepped forward, the same one who had whispered earlier about the boarding pass. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice didn't. I saw everything, she said. From the beginning, and I'm willing to write a statement. Another passenger followed, then another. The collapse spread not through force, but through voices. Witnesses who had chosen silence at first were choosing clarity now. Each statement another thread pulled loose from the fabric that had held the incident together. Phones stayed raised, not for spectacle anymore, but for record. The pilot approached Naomi again, more personal this time. I want you to know, he said. This isn't how we're supposed to operate. Naomi looked past him, toward the runway. Systems don't fail because they're broken, she replied. They fail because they're comfortable. He nodded slowly. The boarding screen flickered once more. Flight canceled, pending investigation. A collective intake of breath swept the gate. This was no longer about a delay. This was consequence. Naomi felt her phone vibrate softly in her bag. She didn't look at it yet. She already knew what it would say. The system had locked itself down. The supervisor returned with a tablet in hand. "Miss Carter," she said, "corporate compliance has been notified. They're initiating a full review." Naomi finally allowed herself a breath. "Good," she said. Around her, the terminal buzzed with a different energy now, not tension, but reckoning. People spoke in low voices, replaying what they'd seen, realizing they'd been part of something larger than a missed flight. Naomi Carter stood at the center of the gate, navy suit immaculate, posture unshaken. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded respect. She had simply stayed long enough for the system to collapse under its own weight. And everyone watching understood this wasn't the end. It was the cost. The terminal slowly returned to motion, but it was different now. Not louder, not calmer, more aware. People moved with purpose, not impatience. Conversations carried weight. Strangers who had stood side by side moments earlier now exchanged quiet looks of recognition, as if to say, "We saw the same thing." Naomi Carter stepped away from the gate at last. Not because she was asked to, but because the moment had finished saying what it needed to say. She stood near the glass wall overlooking the runway, hands resting loosely at her sides. Outside, planes continued their endless choreography departures, arrivals, systems functioning as designed. Inside, one system had been forced to look at itself. The supervisor approached again, slower now, careful. "Miss Carter," she said, "corporate compliance would like to speak with you directly, whenever you're ready." Naomi nodded. In a moment. She turned back toward the gate one final time. The witnesses were still there. The young employee clutching a notepad. The woman who had spoken up first. Passengers who had chosen not to look away. Naomi lifted her voice, not loud, but clear enough to carry. "I want to say something," she said. The terminal quieted instinctively. "This wasn't about me," Naomi continued. "Not really. It was about what happens when people believe respect is conditional, when dignity depends on appearance, when silence is mistaken for consent." No one interrupted. "I didn't raise my voice today," she said. "I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't ask for special treatment." She paused. I stood still, and I watched. The words settled deep. "Every system eventually reveals itself," Naomi went on. "The question is whether we're willing to see it or whether we only act when someone important is involved." Her eyes moved across the room, steady and unflinching. "If my name hadn't been recognized," she said, "this would have ended very differently. And that's what needs to change." Izitiriaizo. The pilot stood a few feet behind her now, listening not as authority, but as a witness himself. Naomi nodded once, as if concluding a meeting she had been leading all along. "Thank you to those who spoke," she said, "and to those who stayed." Then she turned away. No applause followed. None was needed. Later, as she walked down the concourse, her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Yes," she said quietly. A pause. Then, "Document everything. I want this handled exactly by policy, no shortcuts." Another pause. "And one more thing," Naomi added. "Make sure the corrective actions apply to everyone, not just today." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. Behind her, the terminal continued to hum, but something fundamental had shifted. A story would be told, clips would circulate, opinions would form. But the real change wouldn't trend. It would happen quietly, in training rooms, in protocols rewritten. In moments where someone would hesitate remembering this and choose differently. Naomi Carter walked forward, navy suit catching the light, posture unbowed. She hadn't come to prove who she was. She had come to raise the standard. And the system would never forget the day it was tested. By a woman who didn't shout, didn't beg, and didn't move, until the truth had nowhere left to stand but in the open.